As above, so below. So below, as above. Your body is your mind, and your mind is your body. It's all one thing. What's happening in our thoughts, what's happening in our spiritual content, in our vibration, is manifest in our emotions and our physical body. We are a continuum. We're not just mind or spirit or emotions and body. We're one thing. So in this video, I'm going to continue along the lines of showing you the connection between the work of Wilhelm Reich and Carl Jung. The work of Reich is very much embodied and associated with the body and the breath and the muscular system and the nervous system. And the work of Carl Jung is very much associated with the spiritual realms, the high realms, the thought realms. But in this video in particular, I'm going to focus on the work of Wilhelm Reich. Many of the things I'm going to say in this video, you may have never heard before. A lot of it may sound strange to what we've been conditioned to believe is right and true about ourselves. I can only offer a direction for you to look and clues and hints as to what may be deeper. If you're wanting to go deeper on your own, I provide resources, and I would like you to consider taking a look at the work of Wilhelm Reich, specifically this book, Character Structure, in order to deeper understand much of what I'm going to be sharing in this video. And I also highly recommend the work of Alexander Lowen, who was a student of Wilhelm Reich, or what we refer to as a neo-Reichian or a new Reichian, someone who's taken the work of a master and have brought it into the contemporary day. In fact, much of the work that was produced by Alexander Lowen, which includes bioenergetic analysis, has even been built upon more so. So a lot of his work was done in the 80s and so forth. And today we've got even more expansive ideas and truth as it relates to body and trauma. That's a lot of what we'll be talking about. So the basic understanding that you're going to need to grasp in order to really take home the things I'm going to share in this video is that the entire world is based on a rhythmical pulsation or a cyclical pulsation. We see this very obviously in the cycles of the day, the daily cycle. The sun rises, the sun sets. We see it in the seasons of the year, and we see it also in how our bodies respond to those universal pulsations. Our hormones are very much tied to the positions of the sun, for example. At nighttime, we go into our anabolic state, and during the day, we go into our energizing catabolic state. You also need to understand that you and I are made up of a pulsating energy. We see this most evidently in our heartbeat. The heartbeat is constantly pulsating. When that pulse arrives in the embryo, there is a life there because there's pulsation there. When that pulsation leaves, the heart rate doesn't exist, you don't exist. We don't exist without connection to our primal pulsations. We are very much tied to the cosmic pulsations, and every single cell in our body pulsates. As human beings, we also have conscious control over one of our most primary pulsations, which is our breathing pulsation. Every time we inhale, we're starting the cycle. And then we exhale, we continue the cycle. And every time that we consume and produce, every time that we expand and contract, every time that we breathe in and breathe out, every time that we inspire and expire, we are consciously and oftentimes unconsciously. It's interesting. It's sort of a balance between the two with breathing. We can consciously decide how we're going to breathe in any moment, and we are very often controlled by the unconscious pulsation of habitual breathing patterns. According to Wilhelm Reich, there is a most resourceful breathing pulsation. He referred to this as the orgastic wave. And Wilhelm Reich, because he was always looking to tie things back to the physical health, recognized that our bodily pulsations not only dictate the movement in our body, the heart rate and the breathing and whatnot, but also impact our character. You know this to be true because if an extrinsic force exerts itself upon you, say you're standing in a hallway and somebody comes behind you and flashes a symbol, you turn into a completely different person because your pulsations are shocked. Heart rate goes up, eyeball pulsations change, breathing pulsations change, and you are a jittery mess. So your character has an acute response to a disturbance within your pulsation. The amazing thing about being a human being is that when we recognize that there's a disturbance in our pulsation, we can take action in order to influence it. So for example, if somebody comes behind you and smashes that cymbal and all of a sudden you freak out and realize what's going on, you can either get into alignment with that pulsation and allow yourself to breathe deeply. Holy cow, you scared me. Or you can resist it by biting down on your lip or sucking your belly in. Bang! That, when you tighten up your body and don't allow the full pulsation to move through you in that spontaneous way, is called a freeze response. A freeze response is literally when there would be a impulse, there would be a spontaneous reaction within your pulsations become stifled. You stop that pulsation. The thing about the freeze reaction and the stifling of that pulsation is that it can grow chronic, meaning we can begin to do it unconsciously. And in fact, many of us, most of us, have unconscious pulsation stoppages that don't allow us to feel our full emotions and express ourselves most fully. I'd like to use the following example to sort of tie it all together for you. So take, for example, a young man who grew up in an abusive home. Maybe the dad was an alcoholic. And so after having multiple experiences of dad coming home drinking and then either fighting with mom or attacking the boy when he was young, the boy begins to recognize that I ought to be quiet when dad gets home, or walk on eggshells, like you say. Just make myself small and disappear so that I don't trigger dad. Well, that is all a blockage of pulsation. So for example, the young man will stop breathing so deeply when dad comes home. This first happens as a unconscious reaction, but then over time, time after time, dad comes home and you get nervous, right? Your shoulders might go up. There's a myriad of different reactions within the body of every different individual, but they're there if you pay attention. Then as that man grows up, as that little boy grows up and he goes out into the regular world, and every time he is in the vicinity of a male authority figure, he can't help but to feel diminished or to feel small. This is where an old trauma, the reaction thereof, is carried into present day life and affects the way the young man behaves. His dad is no longer there being abusive and drinking alcohol, but the reaction to somebody that reminds him of his dad in present day may draw up, and oftentimes does, draw up that unconscious reaction. And then the same young man may wonder, why can't I become an authority in my own life? Why do I have a hard time being the sovereign king, fathering myself, being the man in my life? Every time that there is a man of authority around me, I reject him, and in doing so, I reject the authority in me. And you could try to think yourself out of that. You can read books about it, you can have conversations about it, you can shed conscious light on the fact that that's happening, but until the unconscious physical reactions that are stopping the pulsations in your bodies are resolved, you're going to keep repeating the same thing. So according to Wilhelm Reich, our entire body breathes, and what he referred to as that orgastic wave has very much to do with, yes, the inhalation and exhalation process, but also the entire muscular system as it relates to how one breathes. And going into the biomechanics of it very briefly, when there's an inhalation, there's extension. You learn this in exercise physiology. Inhalation is coupled with an extension. Exhalation is coupled with a flexion. And your entire body does that. So you've got the segment across your eyes, like I mentioned, segment across your jaw that I mentioned, right? There's a natural pulsation associated with moving your mouth when you speak or kissing or biting, you see? The lips and the mouth are an aggressive area of the body, but also a receptive part of the body. We kiss with the same place that we bite with, you see? And so on and so forth. So you've got tension that can be produced or relaxed, a pulsation that's available through the throat, through the heart, through the solar plexus, which is the midpoint of the body and the one that holds most of our fearful, angry emotions. The belly, there's a pulsation associated with the inhalation and the expansion of the belly and the exhalation and the flattening of the belly. Many times that gets disturbed because people are trying to look thin, right? They're trying to hold their belly in. So when there's an inhalation, the belly goes in, which is counter pulsation. And then, of course, that disturbs and has an effect on the pelvic floor. A disturbance within the pelvic floor will create a myriad of different effects, including sexual dysfunction. In fact, according to Wilhelm Reich, the sexual act is a microcosm of how a person behaves in life. Because when we are in when we allow ourselves to be in the sexual act, there is a hope for a complete dissolution of the ego, a complete relaxing, a complete dying to oneself. That's why in French they call the orgasm le petit mort, the little death. And if you're having sexual disturbances, it is a indication that there are pulsation blockages throughout our entire body. Now, early in this video, I spoke about how the mind is the body and the body is the mind. Now, you got to recognize that as human beings, we are perceptive creatures, and there may be perceived threats in our environment, right? So, for example, when you were very young, maybe you were bitten by a dog. And so for the rest of your life, every time a dog comes around, you have what may be considered an asthmatic or an allergic reaction, but really it is the tightening of your lungs. You know, there's fear associated with it, so your solar plexus tightens up. This becomes an unconscious reaction to a perception based on an experience that no longer exists. We're all challenged with this. Anytime we have a traumatic experience, and we all have traumatic experiences, our body goes into a reaction. And if the trauma is not released properly in the moment, we carry it with us sometimes for decades. Sometimes to our death, we are still haunted by unconscious traumas from decades ago that are still trapped in our bodies, and we react with those old patterns. So as advancing human beings, we're wanting to be the strongest version of ourselves. And if you're watching this channel, you're probably somebody who's very much engaged in the exercise activity of exercising. And that's really good, because as your body changes, you also know that your mind changes. As your body changes, that pulsation that is the link between the mind and the body changes. Someone who never exercises before, but now starts walking or jogging on a treadmill, activates a brand new pulsation in the body, which releases tension in the belly, in the lungs, in the throat, in the eyes, even in the face. When you're sucking breath and you're out of breath, there's a relaxation of the jaw, there may be a relaxation of the eyes. Your entire physiology goes into a completely different construct when you are actively engaging in different types of exercise. This is why we should definitely be very cautious about the types of exercise we engage in, because some exercises create counter pulsation. So for example, a lot of us like to do bench presses and build up our big old hard titties. Well, what that does is oftentimes it creates a counter pulsation in the chest. In this, I could refer to it as a heart chakra if you want to go that route. Many people get disturbed when I say that, but it merely is the bundle of nerves and muscles associated with this segment of your body. When that gets built up and tense, and you're trying to breathe fully in that orgastic way that Wilhelm Reich speaks about, and you're stuck in your chest, you are limiting your ability to feel what the heart wants to feel. So when we engage in our exercise programs, we're not just changing our bodies. Remember this, folks, it is key to your development of the strongest version of yourself. When you are exercising, you are shifting your character, changing your mind. And also, when we shift our mental perspective on things, when we let go of old mental patterns and habits, our body begins to change. If you let go of old fears and inhibitions, I love that word inhibition because it's sort of a mind-body word. When you let go of old inhibitions, your body relaxes. If you are one of these people that say, for example, young men wanting to speak to girls, and every time you get around a girl, you get this feeling in your belly starts to tighten up, and you start to choke. You know, people who choke, there's a great term to describe it because tension rises up from the belly into the heart and throat, and you don't know what to do or you don't know what to say. This happens to athletes all the time also too. As you begin to let go of the fears of failing on the court or failing when speaking with a woman or whatever it is that you have hang-ups about, the body begins to relax. The mind is the body. The body is the mind. It's all one thing. Now, although my intention for this video is just to shed light briefly on a few ideas that I find to be very resourceful for those on the path of becoming the strongest version of themselves, you ought to know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that I'd like to share with you, and perhaps it'll be a part of the next video, is how these segments that grow chronic in their restriction of pulsation over time begin to shape our bodies. And according to Wilhelm Reich, there are predictable psychological character ways of being, your personality, that are associated with body types. In other words, where you're holding that tension, where you're fighting pulsation in any of those segments in your body, begin to develop a shape of a character. And you know these characters, unconsciously, we all know these characters are true because you see them in Hollywood. There's a particular shape and type of individual that goes with a particular type of role. So for example, you know, the guy who's kind of round-bodied and thick, usually a little bit chubbier and fat. We see them in movies all the time as comedians. They're jokers. There is a psychological predisposition associated with having a body that is stuck in that way. And I use that word stuck to describe how we fight against pulsation and feeling in our bodies. It's not a knock because we all are stuck. If you've got a body, you're stuck in some way. So in the next video in this teaching series that I'll produce next week, I'll talk a little bit more about each one of those character structures with hopes that you could see a little bit of yourself in each one of them or in any one of them and be able to have a better perspective on what might support you in resolving some of those pulsation blocks and the segments that keep you imprisoned as a version of yourself that you no longer need to be. We can let go of those tensions so that we can arise as our most fully integrated and strongest self. Also, you ought to know that when you join us at Grounding Man, we are going to begin with a series of assessments that allows you to discover where in your physical body you seem to be holding tension or fighting against feeling and blocking pulsation, so that we can then engage in exercises in order to bring about more fullness of self-expression through these segments and become our strongest selves by being able to express all that we know we can be in this lifetime. Until then, done.